contribution in the post-colonial phase, that is independent India. The first one will cover the contribution of Indian diaspora during colonial age, especially in the India's freedom struggles. And today's webinar is largely focused on contiguous region covering, as I said, South Africa, Mauritius, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, all these regions which are contiguous. And we are trying to understand the contribution of Indian diaspora, especially PIO, in the freedom struggles of India. This is especially important that today, when it is 2nd of October, we have one of the contribution from Indian diaspora in India's freedom struggle, whose birthday is today, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi had gone to South Africa, as all of you know, since 1892 itself. He was active, established Indian National Congress over there then, got settled down, established farm, got involved in all the local freedom struggle. But it is that he was a diaspora, and he celebrated as a distinguished diaspora because on his return to India, we celebrate Pravasi Bharatiya Divas on that day every year. So this is the day when one of the outstanding Indian diaspora, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, was born, and South Africa leased us this diaspora who came to India in 1950, and from 1915 onward contributed significantly to India freedom struggle, which all of you know. So this day is doubly important for us, that we are starting a series on celebrating the Azadi Ka Mahotsav, 75 years of India's independence, by paying tribute, acknowledging and celebrating celebration which Indian diaspora made in freedom struggle of India. As all of you know, that their contribution is significant, but it is largely confined to the fact that we discuss now diaspora from 1990 onward, when they got engaged during globalization phase. And this had been a missing part of Indian academics, that because of Nehruvian policy from 1920 onwards, which actively promoted active dissociation with Indian diaspora and wanted to distance itself till not just till independence, till Nehru was alive. And that led to a major academic gap, a major academic pursuit in understanding, acknowledging, and celebrating the different role the diaspora played into different countries in different ways in supporting, siding with, identifying with, contributing to India's freedom struggle. So through this, we are trying to acknowledge that, to document that, and to celebrate that, and correct that part of the history, which only remain confined to the people, to organizations like then Jansangh or RSS, who never agreed with Nehruvian policy and maintained a very active cultural connect despite having a very strong state disconnect with diaspora world over. And therefore, we are trying now to capture and document that part of the history. And we have very distinguished colleagues from different contiguous regions who are going to share with us the contribution that Indian diaspora made. And it's so outstanding. We have from South Africa. We'll hear what kind of contribution was made, not just by Gandhi, but others. We also have several others from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, where INA or Subhash Chandra Bose contribution is unparalleled in terms of a diaspora supporting the freedom struggle of the home country. And therefore, we are going to have a very exciting session and we'll listen about the contribution from the academics of these countries itself. I won't take much time, but once again, I welcome all of you who have come here, my Vice Chancellor, Honorable Ministers, distinguished participants from all over, and the distinguished speaker of the inaugural session. Thank you for coming, and may I invite now Dr. Susmita Rajwa to just introduce the theme and the academic programs that we have on the diaspora at our center. Dr. Susmita Rajwa.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir. With regard to all the distinguished speakers that we have today, Honorable Vice Chancellor of JNU, Professor M. Jagdish Kumar, our Chief Guest, Dr. Rajkumar Ranjan Singh, Honorable Minister of State for External Affairs and Education, Government of India, Shri Shyam Parande ji, Secretary General, Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad, Professor Brajita Biswas, Professor Dubey, Professor Kavita Sharma, all the distinguished speakers of today's symposium, and all the participants that we have here today. I welcome you all once again to this web symposium. I would like to introduce you to the theme of the symposium today. But before that, let me just give a brief about the organizers. The Diaspora and International Migration Program is at the Center for African Studies, JNU. The Center for African Studies is an interdisciplinary center along with the African Affairs. It also focuses on diaspora issues. We have two major programs of studies at the center, MPhil and PhD. It also offers courses for the MA program that is offered by the School of International Studies, where the Center for African Studies is located at JNU. The academic curriculum of the center includes, besides other issues, diasporas with an emphasis on Indian diaspora. The center offers master level core course on diasporas in international relations. The center has also produced a dozen doctoral level theses which have focused specifically on diaspora related issues. The center faculty have produced several books and research papers, publications on the subject of diaspora. Center also has a major research program on diaspora and development, comparative assessment of harnessing globalization, which was started and funded under the UPA 2 scheme by JNU UGC. Diaspora-related seminars and conferences have been organized regularly by the center in order to strengthen the academic program. We have several conferences that were organized in the past, as well as during the last year, several webinars were organized. Now about the other organizers, which is the ODI, Organization for Diaspora Initiatives, is working to understand the status and role of diasporic communities across the globe, both in domestic and international context. It maps the emerging roles, networks, operations of different diasporic communities as a resource in the international civil society space, as well as in the host and home countries. So, ODI interacts and links various diasporic communities to ensure a voice for just a moment. So we have been trying to interact and ensure voice for various communities who feel disempowered under the watertight state-based international system. And ODI has also been working by comparing and contrasting the experiences of different diasporas. Several international conferences, symposia, lectures, workshops have been organized in the past by ODI, and in the field of publication, several books, journals, and occasional papers have been brought about on the subject of diaspora. So, just 1 minute. There's some problem with the PPT. I'll just share it.
Okay.
So there are various events and webinars that we have organized in the past. And last year, several webinars were organized on the pertinent issues of diaspora that were in 2020. Diaspora Studies also has a journal. Diaspora Studies is the journal that we have published from Routledge, London. It is indexed in both Scopus and Web of Sciences. And there are also various other publications like books on Indian diaspora, contributions to their home, Indian diaspora in Africa, Indian diaspora global identity. All of them have been edited by Professor Azadi. Now coming to the theme of today's webinar, Web Symposium. Today's Web Symposium is on the contribution of the Indian diaspora in the freedom struggles of India. So we will be focusing on mainly on the contributions part. So the nationalist movement gained momentum with the help of great reformers and leaders in India who gained exposure from many other countries. These leaders were the driving force behind taking the Indian nationalist movement forward and spreading the objectives of these movements among the international community. There was a large number of Indian diaspora in the British colonies who had traveled under different capacities like that of indentured labor or passenger Indians. The Indian leaders in the 20th century started traveling to British colonies to seek the support of the Indian diaspora community for their support for their national movements. Lala Lajpat Rai went to seek support and assistance from Indians in Canada. Mahatma Gandhi's principles like ahimsa, non-violence, satyagraha were used for the first time in South Africa. Subhash Chandra Bose also went abroad and spread awareness among the Indian students and other Indians for supporting, driving support for the struggles against the British. There were many important organizations and movements that had promoted the interests of the nationalists in India. For example, the India House, which was a student resistance movement that existed from 1905 to 1910 in London under the patronage of Shyamji Krishna Verma. They used to grant scholarship to Indian students to study abroad in Britain. They also published newspapers like Indian Sociologist, which was later banned by the British. 1913, again, Pacific Coast Hindustan Association was formed by Lala Hardayal with Sohan Singh Bhagna at the Yugantar Ashram in San Francisco. This later came to be known as the Ghadar Party. The immigrant Sikhs of US and Canada were the members of this party, and they published the Ghadar in Punjabi languages also. So Lala Hardayal had also been a great influencer for students from California University to join the Indian national movement. The role of women activists of the Ghadar movement like Gulab Kaur, Bika Jindama is also seen as a very important factor. After Lala Hardayal was compelled to leave USA, he moved to Germany and he set up the Indian Independence Committee in Berlin. Similarly, there are other leaders also, many other leaders who had worked hard to create this awareness amongst the Indian communities abroad to join the Indian national movement. With this background, this web symposium seeks to address the role of the Indian diaspora in the Indian national movement at different periods of time and through the help of various organizations and associations that they had built. The proposed webinar would therefore deliberate on the following issues: Indian leadership of the Indian national movement, encounters with Indian diaspora by the Indian leaders, methods of mobilization of Indian diaspora by Indian leaders, and various organizations involved in the support of the Indian movement abroad. So I would like to stop here, and I wish that we have some very interesting and enlightening deliberations today in the symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Susmita Rajwar. Honorable Minister has joined. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for joining and being with us. We know you are traveling, but we are grateful that you are here now. Surjit, I think his video is off. Honorable Minister video is off.
Okay, sir, I will just inform.
Okay.
Sir, he's very much there.
Yes, yes. Yes, sir. Sir.
Okay.
Namaskar, sir. Welcome to this webinar. Yes, sir. With your permission, can we proceed? Then we come back to you. Yes.
Yeah, please.
So now we have our own Vice Chancellor, Honorable Professor M. Jagdish Kumar, whom all of you know. But we have large number of foreign participants who are participating here for the first time. So let me just give a very short introduction, though his CV is too big. He obtained his MS and PhD degree from Department of Electrical Engineering, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. From 91 to 94, he did his postdoctoral at Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, University of Waterloo. He taught at Department of Electronics and Electrical Communication Engineering, Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, and later he moved to Department of Electrical Engineering in Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, July 1997, and he's still there, and he's on deputation to Jawaharlal Nehru University as Vice Chancellor. He held an XP chair professor established at IIT Delhi by Philip Semiconductor, Netherlands. He was chairman of the electronic group in Department of Electrical Engineering. He was coordinator of VLSI design, tools and technology interdisciplinary program. He was a chief investigator of nanoscale research facility funded by Ministry of Information and Technology at IIT Delhi. He was also a chief investigator of the Center for Excellence of Nano Device System funded. I'll just take 1 minute, sir. We have some foreign participants. Thank you for your patience. He works in the area of nano electronic device, nanoscale device modeling and simulation. And he had written several book chapters and more than 200 publications in reference journal and conferences. And 6 patent applications have been filed by his research team. In 2007 and 8, he was vice chairman of joint entrance examination at IIT Delhi, which conducts the IIT entrance exam for undergraduate students. He was also a member of University Grant Commission, UGC, and he has several others accomplishments, but I will not take it up now. It's available on the web. Thank you, sir, for coming and joining, and over to you, sir. I know you had been very supportive of our diaspora program or Africa program, had been finding time despite being busy all the time, and had been encouraging the students and faculty to be active even in the most difficult Corona period through webinars. So welcome once again, sir, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ajay. Honorable Ministers, all the distinguished colleagues, my dear students, and all the participants from India and from outside India. My pranams to all of you. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of JNU to this very, very important program where we have the minister himself to share some of his thoughts. I was listening to Professor Ajay Dubey, and three words caught my attention. One very important thing that he mentioned is we are celebrating the Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav, and he said today is 2nd October, and therefore he recollected about Mahatma Gandhi's contribution. So I was thinking that whatever I'm going to speak in the next few minutes, let me weave my talk around the terms that Professor Ajay Dubey has used in his introductory remarks. It was on 9th January 1915 that Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, as he was known in those days, returned to India from South Africa after 21 years of his stay as part of the Indian diaspora in South Africa. So whenever we think about Mahatma Gandhi, several things come in our mind, such as his contributions to non-violence, his insistence on education, cleanliness, peace, and of course, his contribution to freedom struggle is something that is globally known. But however, there is one domain where Gandhi's contributions and relevance cannot be overlooked in the contemporary India and also in the whole world. I would like to spare few minutes to highlight some of his thoughts, how his thoughts have contributed to the modern concept of sustainable development. So if you think about some of the major challenges that the world is facing today, the humanity is facing today, what comes in your mind? Of course, several things will come on top of your head. Pandemics such as COVID could be there in the list of things that come in your mind. But however, there are three important things that human societies are facing today, three important challenges. One is the frequent failure of the economic systems. And the other one is the increasing global inequality. And the third most important thing is the deteriorating environmental situation. And I will tell you very briefly how in the current context we have started finding solutions to meet these challenges, and how Gandhiji's own thinking process, which is rooted in our Indian civilization, Indian culture, has actually become very, very relevant in modern day. Amidst all these challenges, the word sustainable development became a buzzword starting from the Earth Summit, which was held in 1982, because people started thinking that there is an immediate need to bring an equilibrium between social development, economic development, and of course the protection of the environment. And this word sustainable development was also endorsed by the UNGA in the same year. There is, of course, there is no accurate definition of the sustainable development. People use it in different ways, in different contexts. But however, one general understanding that we have about sustainable development is that it is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. We all come from higher education, the people who are participating in this webinar. Now, can we think on this important day, on 2nd October, and as we are celebrating the Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav as higher educational institutes, what can we do to realize the goals set by Mahatma Gandhi? Although he did not use the word sustainable development in those days, I'm very, very clear that his ideas were actually pointing to the education for sustainable development. In fact, a concept that was formulated by the World Education Forum in 2015. This declaration is also known as the Education 2030 Agenda. And we all know that in India, especially for those distinguished colleagues who are listening from outside India, just last year, we have unveiled the National Education Policy 2020 with the aim of transforming our country into a knowledge society. And this National Education Policy puts a lot of emphasis on this Education 2030 agenda, especially because this is related to Target 4.7 of SDG 4, which states that by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among other things, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity. These are all things that were very close to Gandhiji's heart. Peace, non-violence, appreciation of cultural diversity, education. That is why for our National Education Policy 2020, education for sustainable development forms an important component of the policy, because education for sustainable development has the potential to make the human beings agents of change. Some scholars believe that it is not the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets that UN has set for itself will change the world, but it is the people who are empowered through education to become responsible for a sustainable future. Only they can bring a change in the world today towards sustainable development. Right from the school to higher education, therefore, scholars advocate that students should be sensitized on topics such as the impact of climate change on our lives, need for food and energy security, disaster mitigation and management, waste management, protecting biodiversity, reduction of poverty, adopting sustainable means of production and consumption, prevention of land degradation, and protection of water resources. Therefore, the education for sustainable development, it needs to take into account constantly changing planetary conditions and environmental issues and the resultant risks by empowering the learners to make informed and responsible decisions. And this is the only way we can protect environmental integrity and economic viability and build just social systems. This is the word that I would like to underline. Building just social systems was also one of the goals of Mahatma Gandhi. Establishing Ram Rajya is what I think is building a just social system. Recently, some scholars have also argued that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are indeed vague, weak, and meaningless. And they argue that these goals and these SDGs are in fact in conflict with the 1987 UN report, which is titled as Our Common Future. Why do they say so? Because they argue that sustainable development is possible only by using a set of constraints on human activities, including economic activities, and that the moral imperatives of needs, equity, and limits should guide policy making. This is something very close to Mahatma Gandhi has said. I will come to that a little later. What the recent scholars, the recent arguments put by the scholars on why we should relook into the very SDGs formulated by UN is something that I tend to agree, because the newer concepts that are coming in terms of sustainable development, they are in fact very close to our own Indian thought process. In fact, long ago, this moral imperative that the scholars are talking about now in order to realize sustainable development was best captured in our Isha Upanishad. In Isha Upanishad, it was said that everything in the universe belongs to the Supreme God. Therefore, take only what you need that is set aside for you. Do not take anything else, for you know to whom it belongs. In fact, the moral imperatives that the scholars are now talking, which should be part of any policy if we want to realize the sustainable development, was best captured by our own Shanti mantra. Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam, Karavavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidvishavahai, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. You know the meaning of this Shanti mantra. I don't have to tell you, but let me also emphasize the concept of establishing a just society, the concept of establishing a Ram Rajya in order to realize sustainable development and sustainable living through education for sustainable development was indeed captured in a verse in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Let me read out that, and many of you must be maybe familiar with this. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukinaha, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma kashit dukha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May all be prosperous and happy. May all be free from illness. May all see what is spiritually uplifting. May no one suffer. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. These are the concepts that are required now if you want to build a prosperous, peaceful, happy, and sustainable world. While it is important for our students to know what the Western scholars are talking about sustainable development as educational institutes, it is also equally important for us to teach our students how our own Indian culture and civilization views sustainable development in a holistic manner, not in a piecemeal manner. And this is where I think our campuses should promote as higher educational institutes effective management of waste, water, energy, and transportation, and become role models for the rest of the society. So to summarize what I have said so far in Mahatma Gandhi's very own words, how to build a sustainable world, and his views are based on our own Indian culture and civilization. Let me conclude by quoting Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "The country's development has to be in harmony with nature. The earth has resources to meet everybody's needs, but not anybody's greed. We must learn to live lives of simplicity and austerity." On this very important day, when all of us have joined in this meeting from across the globe, I think it is important for us to recollect what Mahatma Gandhi has said about building Ram Rajya, a just society through sustainable development. So with those comments, I would like to conclude here. But before I log off, I would like to extend very warm welcome once more to all the participants of this very, very important event. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor. When India was fighting independence, which was very crucial thing for India, the diaspora contributed many ways we discussed. And thank you for suggesting that when India is now confronting some of these global challenges in a webinar like this, by outlining them, the global Indian diaspora, which is spread all over the world, will join hands with India in this crucial endeavor of India to meet these current challenges. Thank you for your very relevant message and your support. We have now, I think there is noise because of Facebook, this thing. We have now Sri Shyam Parandeji with us in the inaugural session. He is the Secretary General of Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad, which for several decades is very active in promoting India's Diaspora Connect, recognizing them, associating with them, communicating with them. When the Indian state, even during Nehruvian period till mid-1990s, was not recognizing overtly Indian diaspora as part of India's concern. But Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad is now celebrating the 100th birth anniversary of its most important personality who led this Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad, Sri Baleshwar Agrawal. He devoted time when there was no connect with diaspora to connect with Indian diaspora during several decades. And Sri Sam Parandeji is leading that organization from the front. I, as a student, when I started learning Indian diaspora, it was this organization which could support me, put me in touch, took me to different countries to understand diaspora. So I'm very grateful personally to this organization. And over to Shyamji to share his thoughts on this issue, as he will not just bring the practical aspect of how Indian diaspora confronted during colonial time to support India, but also a very diverse knowledge about Indian diaspora's global contribution in freedom struggle. Over to you, Shyamji. Shyamji,
Yeah.
yes, the voice is
Thank
just
you.
resonating. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ajay Kumar Dubey ji. Honorable Minister Dr. Rajkumar Ranjan Singh ji. Honorable Vice Chancellor Jagdish ji. Chairperson of ODI, Dr. Kavita Sharma ji. All the scholars, academicians present in the webinar. My pranam. At the outset, I would like to appreciate that ODI has taken upon itself the task of being part of the Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav. And this is an occasion when we need to go beyond what we had been reading all the last, say, 75 years. India received independence due to various factors, a very vibrant leadership from all corners of the country and beyond. As a matter of fact, when we look at diaspora's contribution to independence struggle, it can be divided into two parts broadly. One is the diaspora directly got involved into India's independence. Indians who traveled outside for studies or otherwise loved the country they had left and wanted to be part of the independence struggle. Well, Mahatma Gandhi's name we all the time take. But once we start looking at the other leaders and we find there are equally towering personalities who rose from the diaspora. So we need to understand that. But beyond that, it's not only India's neighborhood which benefited out of India's struggle for freedom, independence, and motivated a lot of other countries which were under colonial rules to get out of the colonial bondage. So that's second part, the diaspora being common over there, they also fought back for the adopted country's independence. So this can be seen into two parts and needs to be studied well in depth. Then only the story will come out in toto. Having said that, I feel I had the good fortune of visiting various centers where the struggle happened. I'll start from San Francisco. Yes, the headquarters of the Gadar movement still inspires people. India House, as Sushmita ji has rightly mentioned, was a great place in those days, though for a shorter period, and generated a lot of youth to get into action and revolt. And then Mahatma Gandhi's struggle in South Africa. As we travel towards east, the closest country, Burma, which supported the diaspora over there supported Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And as we travel towards eastwards, it's Thailand, Bangkok, it's Singapore, it's Kuala Lumpur, all over there. The diaspora, wherever they were, they supported the struggle. When we start talking about the diaspora, of course, it was Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa, Durban, and he revolutionized in a way the diaspora. In those days, he used to publish a monthly which was circulated amongst the diaspora. And due to financial constraints, that monthly he wanted to stop. Diaspora from Trinidad, Indians from Trinidad wrote to Mahatma Gandhi that if you need money, we'll send money, we'll support financially, but keep that going. Dr. Hardayal, who was, I'm shifting to the other side, Dr. Hardayal, who was also part of India House in London, moved to California and was part of establishing the Gadar organization. And Gadar also published a news bulletin. I was amazed to note that 1 million copies of that were in circulation. 1 million copies of a publication even today seems gigantic task. But the diaspora all over the world, as well as Indians in India, were looking forward to getting news across the world. Wherever they can rise, they rose. And that's how this galvanized the whole independence struggles across the world. That's my point. I was in Burma last year, Myanmar now. And in Rangoon, I could meet an old lady and a couple of others who were all past 90 years of their age. And in July 1944, when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose visited Yangon, today's then Rangoon, and addressed a gathering in the town hall over there, Indian diaspora listened to him with all their heart and mind. And at the end, an old lady rose and she said she had at least 1 kilogram of gold on her body. She presented it in the assembly to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and there started everybody, whatever they had, offered Netaji. The money he was asking for something like 1 million rupees. And that was already done within a meeting. And they promised him, Netaji, don't go back, never go back till India achieves independence. All the money you need for your struggle, for arms or whatever that might be, will be provided by Indians from Burma. And I met some of them who were present in the meeting. They were then very young. So that was the spirit I appreciated, and they still are living. And I wonder, such testimonies need to be recorded into videos and all that for the archives, which are which are so valuable now. And beyond that, as I've been visited Singapore, and of course in Bangkok also, I met colleagues who were part of INA, and some of them had marched till Moirang. Today we have minister from that state amongst us, and I'm glad he is here so he can tell the story how Netaji reached Imphal or Manipur and was on way to Kohima also. And in Singapore also, similar story was there. The diaspora totally supported Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose that they will fight back the colonial powers as much power as they can. In Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, the local Indian population formed a Malaysian political party, Malaysian Indian Congress, to fight back the colonial power in India, joining India's struggle. So this story goes much beyond that. And after that, as India received the independence, Mauritius got motivated, the leadership in Mauritius got motivated from India's independence struggle. It was similar in East Africa, in Kenya, the freedom struggle in good numbers was joined by Indians over there, of course, Caribbeans also. So it's all over there that Indians fought back the colonial powers to see the end of colonialism. And beyond that, wherever they be, were part of the fight against colonial powers. There are, as I said, started that we need to work much more on what happened. Of course, when I talk about the Gadar headquarters, I also had an occasion to visit Kamagota Maro Memorial, which is in Boston. And that connects us to Canadian Indians in Canada struggle. So these are all spread across. We need to study it, do research, get as much as information as out of that. And as I said, the generation now, which has been part of that, is about to extinguish. And before that, all these needs to be recorded. I appreciate Dr. Ajay Dubeji's effort in bringing this together, as I see scholars from across the world attending this webinar. Thank you very much for listening to me. Namaste.
Thank you, Sri Shyam Parandeji, for bringing these scattered insights which are not still documented. There are several stories which are important to make the academic collections, because theoretically diaspora all over the world had connected with the mother countries whenever it was in crisis. India has such a huge diaspora all over the world, even before independence, and they did connect very strongly emotionally, and in whatever way it was possible to side with, to articulate India's freedom struggle that is going on, to take inspiration from that, to support that. But as I said, because of the Nehruvian policy of active dissociation with diaspora, till Nehru was alive, this was not done, except in 1962 when China attacked India, and Nehru was not finding any means of support from either Western country or India's friend Rasa, which was saying our Indian friend and Western comrades should sort it out. Then, in utter desperation, he looked towards Indian diaspora at that point of time. And he said, which was quite untypical of him, which he had advocated since 1920, that Indian diaspora abroad has two loyalty, one to their country of adoption and one to the mother country. And when he made the appeal for Indian diaspora to support India against China attack, in countries after countries of PIO diaspora, they were queue to support, to contribute in Indian embassies, and the queue lasted for several days to support. As some you are saying, gold, money, whatever they could donate. So that was the connect that existed. But unfortunately, that part is never captured, how diaspora supported all through India. And as a part of the celebration of 75th years of anniversary, when India is proud to become as one of the most powerful emerging countries under Prime Minister Modi, we should also celebrate and remember the people who are outside the country, the way they contributed in the past, and the willingness and emotional connect they have to support India's rise even today. And from this future perspective, we must try to document here and make academic output on this issue. Thank you, Syam Parandeji, for bringing these insights which are not so much heard. Now I have the pleasure to invite a very distinguished chief guest, Sri Rajkumar Ranjan Singh Ji, who is Honorable Minister of State for Ministry of External Affairs and also for Ministry of Education. Usually ministers are largely politicians, but we have a minister who is a celebrated and established professional career academic. So welcome to this webinar, sir. We are very honored and privileged, myself, my Vice Chancellor, and all of us who are here to receive you and to hear you. Just for our audience outside, from outside the country, which I see quite a good number of them from all over the world. Just I'll take 1 minute to introduce Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister Rajkumar Ranjan Singh Ji is a Minister of State for External Affairs of Education, Government of India, and also Minister of State for Education. He was postgraduate in Geography and awarded Doctor of Philosophy from Guwahati University. He was the Registrar of the Manipur University during 2004 and 2008. He served as Director in charge of UGC Academic Staff College and Director of College Development Council